Hello and welcome to a special interview hosted by the Open Society Hub for the Politics of the Anthropocene. My name is Connell Hirsch and I'm a junior researcher at the OHPA. And today I have the privilege of interviewing our postdoctoral researcher, Matteo Mandelli of Sciences Po in Paris. In conjunction with the OHPA, Dr. Mandelli is working on a project entitled Democracy in Ecological Transitions, coordinated by Charlotte Halpern at Sciences Po at the Institute for Environmental Transformations. With all that out of the way, welcome to Vienna, Matteo. It's wonderful to have you here with me, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me.
All right, so just to start off with a kind of a personal question, I was curious to see with your original PhD project what the specific reasons were that drew you into the realm of environmental and sociological politics and policy as a whole, and yeah, basically just what first interested you and why you wanted to get into this field.
Yeah, thank you. So I think my first interest, I was coming more from, let's say, social policy, welfare state studies, and I was seeing a lot in that field. There was a lack of interest for ecological and environmental aspects to social policies. But at the same time, we've been witnessing that there's a sort of a new wave of social risks that is now investing European and also non-European welfare states, of social risks that come directly from the ecological crisis and climate change on the one hand, and also from the sort of regressive climate and environmental policies. And so the idea of the PhD was to try to understand these policies, understand how the European Union with its European social model and European welfare states were coping with this new risk through so-called eco-social policies, so trying to integrate social policy objectives with environmental policy objectives, and then trying to understand what are the political dynamics behind it. Why don't we see that many eco-social policies, and why the few ones that exist have emerged. So this was more or less the interest in it, and why I was driven to social ecology.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's so interesting. So we would say it's pretty much that kind of that border between what would be traditionally considered, like, I guess, traditional welfare policy, et cetera, all that sort of thing, and the bleeding over into now analyzing it, and I guess a new dimension with the ecology in mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so moving on from that, your primary research interests involve the interaction between the ecological crises, so I guess within the broader climate change context, as well as social and welfare policy, particularly in the EU. So you published a paper in 2022 entitled Understanding Eco-Social Policies, a Proposed Definition and Typology. And so in that you try to explore and define this incredibly broad concept. So I was curious if you could kind of as much as possible in a nutshell, trying to, I guess, go over your definition of it and why you sort of crafted that definition the way that you did.
Yeah, definitely. So when I wrote that paper, I was building already on already existing research. So the concept of eco-social policies was already circulating for a while in wonderful work by colleagues like Ian Gough, Milena Bux, and Max Koch, and Tulir Villami, others, many brilliant scholars that were starting to use the eco-social concept, but that was not really fully defined. So there was a lack of a definition that we could have then applied empirically to study eco-social policies. That was the reason that led me to write that paper. And the definition I give there is that eco-social policies pursue integrated social and ecological policy objectives in kind of an explicit way. So I think there are two core things about this definition. The first is given by the word integrated. So it's these are policies that are constructed through policy integration. They don't pursue social and ecological objectives in isolation with respect to one another, but they try to make them reinforce one another and to boost synergies and address the eventual trade-offs. And on the other hand, I was interested in trying to, because I'm a policy analyst and political scientist, I was interested in doing policy analysis on eco-social policies. So I was interested more in the explicit policy goals of public policies, basically, rather than, for instance, in their social and ecological outcomes. So that's why I also included the word explicit into it. And the other dimension was of that paper was to try to sort of distinguish different types of eco-social policies, because it's true that this integration is needed, but we can do it in many different ways. And so in the paper, I distinguish between reactive and preventive eco-social policies, and also between growth-oriented and not growth-oriented eco-social policies. It's kind of a tool to differentiate between different possible bundles of responses that governments have at their disposal when they have to address an eco-social risk.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's so. I mean, you raised so many interesting questions now that I've got my mind, so I'll try and keep it to like only a couple follow-ups, I guess. But yeah, I just like it relates to some of the other stuff that we looked at both in the center and like as a broad in climate politics as a whole, because you have a lot of terminology that kind of keeps getting thrown around, but it's not really been defined yet per se. And so it's interesting to hear that you were focusing specifically on like the explicit policy dimensions, and then I guess also just another follow-up element, something in terms of when we look at like a particular policy implementation, right? Like we have all these, you know, fantastic technologies that keep being developed and whatnot, but especially from like an outsider perspective, especially someone who isn't looking at this policy day in and day out, I think maybe there's like a misconception, I don't know if you could speak to this, but about like, you know, I feel like a lot of time we put a lot of our eggs like into just one basket, right? Sometimes where it's like, oh, it's only EVs are going to save us, right? Or like only this particular technology. And of course, like, you know, when you're looking at a supranational organization like the EU, right? Like, you know, of course, like, and you're trying to design and implement policies into all of these different, very distinct cultural places, like regions. Of course, like there's no one size fits all solution. So yeah, it's just interesting to hear that like, you like, you know, trying to focus like explicitly on those policies in particular, and obviously like a misnomer, I guess, or like something in the discussion insofar as trying to focus on like one dimension, like even just isolating energy itself, for example, right? Doesn't go into, and you're obviously talking about as well post-growth and green growth arguments, etc. And yeah, so I guess just like looking at the contrast of those. Actually, just a quick follow-up, would in terms of like the growth models, or like I guess like the post-growth, etc. Like have you seen, I guess, anything in your own research that in particular has been interesting? I guess like, you know, do you have any favorability, I guess? Do you have any bias towards like post or like continuing like some kind of green growth, or like have you seen more efficacy in like one of those two type of policies?
Yeah, definitely. Well, so the issue, so the literature on eco-social policies and especially the concept of sustainable welfare tries to advocate for a post-growth welfare model that is within planetary boundaries. And there's wonderful work by colleagues of mine, some of them I've already cited, that sort of identify specific policies that could help us, on the one hand, ensuring the social needs, and on the other hand, staying within planetary boundaries. And examples of these include universal basic services, for instance, or universal basic income, participation income, vouchers as well. So there's different examples that are then discussed in the literature. So what we are seeing there is that definitely there's an issue with growth itself, and not precisely with growth itself, but with the material and energy throughput of growth, which is definitely detrimental in an ecological sense. And then the way in which growth is right now pursued, which is extremely neoliberal and unregulated, also has negative consequences on the social dimension. So if I were to give a sort of prescriptive take on this, I would say that green growth does not work on any possible way, and that we should move towards post-growth. But I think that sustainable welfare is peculiar and interesting because it shifts the focus away from growth, which is such a also culturally difficult discussion to have, and it shifts the focus away from sort of the negative aspects of today, sort of deprioritizing growth because it doesn't work, and it focuses on what instead should be prioritized. What do we need? What is positive? What we can work for, which is the social and the environmental dimension. So that's the reason why I like that more than post-growth, but it still would be within a post-growth ideal. Then the question is that if one tries to do empirical research over attempts to build eco-social policy solutions and studying the politics of that in Europe, at least today, it's really hard to find examples of post-growth policies, right? Because the overarching socioeconomic strategic paradigm in which policy changes are inserted is right now growth oriented. So my research has tried to be empirical in this sense, trying to study the policies and the political dynamics that we already witness, even though these might not be the best solutions that we have at hands. But the idea there is that there might be something positive in policy changes, even if this policy changes is not disruptive, is not path breaking, is sort of incremental, because sometimes incremental policy change can lead to more significant transformative change in the end, or at least this is what I would hope for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's incredibly fascinating. That's why I was like, I guess curious about it in particular. Yeah, because I think that's also a debate within like the post-growth circles. Is it's like, oh, do you have revolutionary change right now and just kind of like try to throw, or I wouldn't say yes right now, but like do you try to do it in like a quite revolutionary cascading like I guess way, or I think I agree in the sense that I think, yeah, if you just do small incremental changes over time, I think it's a lot more palatable for both like the politics and I guess just the public as well. Because that's the thing about it, is it's incredibly interesting. Like I've spoken to a decent amount of people also who've come to, and we've been fortunate to like host at the OHPA and whatnot, who are interdisciplinary researchers. And also in combination to like what I've read, is that basically it's, most people are thinking, I think somewhere along the lines of, okay, this current system has gotten us into this mess, so we can't really expect it to get us out of it. Yeah. And I don't know how much you would necessarily agree with that, but at least like that's what I've kind of seen overall.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's it's probably an assumption that can be criticized for sure, but there's the starting point for me would be to accept hope in a way that some positive social and ecological changes can be achieved, and can be achieved sort of in a democratically fair type of way, without sort of going into autocracy, technocracy, or forms or unjust forms of decision making. Is it wishful thinking? I don't know. I hope not. Of course, like the problem with incremental change is that you never know how that's going to end, and the end result will probably not be as transformative as you would have wanted to be, because it's a result of different compromises. But I think we need to start thinking about ways in which we enact change. So how do we push forward certain paradigms within the sort of rules of the game that we are given? And then the rules of the game can also be changed and criticized, of course, but there's a question between the ideal, the utopia that we strive for. Yesterday we were talking about this here, and the concrete actions, both in terms of policy proposals and political strategies that we put forward to make this a reality, basically. Yeah.
All right, well, great. Thank you so much for that. But I'm just going to move on to a different vein of questioning, I guess. Among your impressive resume, you're also a co-founder and a board member of the Sustainable Welfare and Eco-Social Policy Network. This network is described as composing of interdisciplinary scholars around the continent. And could you just talk a little bit about your experience founding that network and what the missions and objectives are for it? And I guess, just like how it's kind of come to fruition, I suppose.
So funny enough, actually, we founded this network in Vienna a couple of years ago in 2022. So basically the Sustainable Welfare Network was going on for even before. And then we kind of merged it with a subgroup of the ESPANET conference, which is the European Conference of Social Policy, where a lot of people were starting to have an interest in this nexus between the welfare state and ecological issues. So we kind of brought together these scholars that were coming a little bit either from, let's say, more ecological economics, and on the other hand, more from welfare state studies. And we tried to build a community there, to put together knowledge and try to build on each other's work. So I co-direct this with a few other colleagues, Katharina Zimmermann, Katharina Bonenberger, Tulir Vilami, and Benedetta Cotta, and we organize different activities, like we have bi-monthly research colloquia, we have a mailing list, a newsletter, we do engagement with policymakers and stakeholders. And basically, the idea is, first of all, to break the silos. This is something that we hear a lot in policymaking, but I think it applies also to academia. Everybody is so caught in their own discipline and in their own specific interests. So we're trying to break this silo, at least between the interest in social and ecological policy, and to promote collaboration, because we started out that we were a few researchers. Now the community is arguably growing, but we want to foster a non-competitive and a sort of friendly environment that builds on each other's research and insights. So this is the main idea. I'm very proud about the network, to be honest, and I think it gives an example of how research could be a community experience, and yeah, and of course it's some topics that I'm interested in. So yeah, that doesn't hurt.
I say it doesn't hurt, definitely. Yeah, I had a similar conversation with Johanna, another one of our postdocs last week, just about environmental politics and like this kind of realm in general, and like how interdisciplinary it is. And I think that's also what like drew me towards it as well, because I'm interested in like a bunch of different things, and so therefore it's hard to like nail down one thing. But of course, like I think it also just makes it quite unique in that sense, because you have such a massive spillover of like all of these different fields and like how they interact with each other. So that's really cool that you've been able to create something that fosters that in a more, I guess, efficient way. So on top of that, I'd like to ask you another question insofar as, so you have worked extensively with several think tanks, such as the Green European Foundation, the European Trade Union Institute, and the European Social Observatory. Could you describe perhaps the collaborations that you enjoyed the most, or I guess found the most interesting with these organizations? And then on top of that, was there anything, I guess, challenging that you found working with such organizations that differed from, I guess, more traditional academic research, and also, I guess, just how this more broadly relates to what you've previously published about as well?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't pick one against the other. I would say that I enjoyed quite all of them, and it was a very enriching experience that I'm very privileged to have done. I think what I like about this experience is that you kind of step out of the ivory tower that research can sometimes be. I am a researcher. I identify as one, and I believe in the importance of research, of reflection, of discussion that is sort of away from the most urgent political reality. But sometimes this is also what I've been missing in research, right? So I'm a policy analyst, political scientist. So for me, research is a form of political engagement, right? And so I think that complementing that with a dialogue with stakeholders, civil society, think tanks, policymakers, it's really, really crucial to feed the debate. And I think what was interesting about the specific collaboration is that you are challenged because the kind of theoretical, analytical constructs that you've been building are then tested against the latest political reality, which is ever changing and always challenging. So it's really difficult to build this connection between grand theories and what is at stake right now in the political agenda, which is what these think tanks are mostly interested in. But it's a needed exercise, I think, because one needs the other. Academia needs the political discussion that is going on right now, and policymaking needs a broader perspective from afar, which is what academia can provide. Then the other aspect that I really liked a lot about this collaboration is that I don't see these as things that I have done. Like, I don't see this as something that I was called to do, and then I wrote something, and all of them were kind of collective, which is what I really liked. So I think the outcomes of these collaborations were sort of crafted in a multi-stakeholder way. We would write reports that then were discussed with civil society, with policymakers, with other think tanks, to get different opinions and insights about something. And this is something that I really enjoy, and it really made me feel that my work there was part of a collective discussion with actors, like-minded actors that were also working on topics related to sustainable welfare and just transition in Europe mostly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say. I find it quite interesting in particular how, we talk about this like ivory tower in academia, and it's how it's kind of a taboo, but let's be honest, it does exist certainly. And I would just say, I guess, like moving on top of that, it's interesting to hear it from the different perspective of like think tanks and more like policy orientated groups, and how, the two both feed off of each other and kind of honestly need to coexist with one another, and therefore it's just interesting to hear it from perspective like someone like yourself who's had one foot in, I guess, both camps at a certain time. And I'm just assuming as well, it sounds like the policies or the advisory reports or like whatever you write, I guess, and when it comes out of these, I would assume they have more efficacy in the long run if you've already incorporated those, that I guess multipolar or that I guess interdisciplinary, for lack of a better term, what's it, like perspectives together initially, so you don't have to go backwards and then reform it, I guess, later on at some point, I suppose, as well. Just following off of that question in particular, so you wrote you co-authored a paper this year called Towards an EU Framework and for a Just Transition, Welfare Policies and Politics for the Socio-Ecological Transition. And so in this, at least in your abstract, you address the key EU policy instruments for a just transition, and in particular the role therein attributed to the welfare policies, and provide insights on the political dynamics behind the emergence and design of these policies. So I guess just in this, suppose specific paper, going back to the experience you had working with those other policy groups and think tanks, was there anything that I guess stood out to you, or anything that maybe you've seen over the years that's been recurring that I guess maybe you'd want to maybe call attention to, or just something that interests you, I suppose? Yeah.
So the idea of this paper was to sort of bring together research that me and my colleague Sebastiano Sabato from the European Social Observatory have been doing for a few years on the emerging socio-ecological dimension of EU policies. We first studied the European semester, and then, of course, when the European Green Deal came, we started studying that and all the policies that followed that. So the paper basically argues that this just transition framework is emerging. It's not the largest area of European Union intervention, but there are actions and policies that have been put forward in that, such as the Just Transition Mechanism in 2021 and the Social Climate Fund in 2023 that precisely address new risks connected to the decarbonization that the European Green Deal is supposed to pursue. And we were also interested to study the political dynamics behind that. So why is it that we started having an attention to the Just Transition framework? And of course, there's different explanations behind it. It's about the von der Leyen needing political support for her first mandate as Commission President, the new sort of green wave, unprecedented green wave that was witnessed in the 2019 European elections, the different movements across Europe that emerged, such as the Fridays for Future, the Extinction Rebellion, and so on. So there was a kind of a unique window of opportunity that was exploited. And then there were interesting political negotiations, especially with those member states of the European Union that were going to probably pay the highest costs of that. So, for instance, the Just Transition Fund emerges as a negotiation especially with Poland, that has, of course, a high share of coal in its energy mix. And the fund was promised as a kind of a compensation to get Poland on board with the decarbonization objective of the European Green Deal. So it was a complex dynamic between external, exogenous pressures and political opportunity and internal negotiation entrepreneurship by the Commission. But since you asked me about the role of the think tanks, what's interesting there is that I really think that there's kind of a just transition epistemic community that has been reinforcing at the European Union level, and many of these think tanks have been, and also other organizations, trade unions, some MEPs, some political groups, and interest groups have been working on the concept of just transition, trying to break the silos again that have characterized the European Union politics, right? Where you work on the one hand only on social policies, labor market policies, on the other hand on environmental policies. So when this political opportunity arose for von der Leyen, there was already kind of an advocacy coalition advocating for just transition at the European Union level. And so this narrative was successful then. And now that the narrative has been translated into concrete policies, we see that this advocacy coalition is sort of getting stronger and stronger. The ties are forming. There are also interpersonal ties and so on and so forth. So it was interesting to see that also while working with these think tanks, because it was kind of an insider take on that. And it's nice that I think this coalition is resisting, even in an era that is characterized now by the green backlash against the European Green Deal, right? Mm-hmm. So it was nice to play a very small and negligible, but still a little part in that scenario, and contribute or see what this coalition was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna say, just like something that comes to head quickly is we had Professor Stef Akut of Universität Hamburg, and he was describing us his research project entitled the geopolitical boomerang in environmental politics. And so, I mean, he was looking at a more global perspective, but yeah, it's just been interesting. We had him as part of our one of our workshops a couple weeks ago. It's called Carbon Societies. Just like thinking about that in that perspective, like, yeah, it's interesting to see like both this backlash, but it's also very reassuring to hear that there is a group of people who are actively, and not necessarily trying to fight it, but who are actively resisting that and following, for lack of a better term, like the science and the social sciences that are making it up, I guess why it's so important as well. So just going to our final, at least serious question. So you are working with the OHPA on a project entitled Democracy and Ecological Transformations. And so this is being led by Dr. Charlotte Halpern, who also gave a talk here at the OHPA, so you can check that out on our YouTube channel as well. Sciences Po, and per your description, it aims to deepen our understanding of interconnections between ecology and democracy. So can you describe what you guys have looked at so far, and I guess what the direction of the project is going to go, if you know that yet?
Yeah, so the idea is really to study this green backlash. How, I mean, at least this is the label that has been given to this phenomenon, but basically this means that there are forces that are now pushing against decarbonization. They're pushing against the European Green Deal. We've seen that with the widespread farmers' movements across Europe. We've seen that in the latest European elections. We see that in many different political dynamics, and we went from kind of this consensual moment that brought us the European Green Deal to this more heated political conflict. So the idea of the project is really to dig deeper into this, both at the supranational level, trying to trace the trajectory that brought us from the Green Deal to the Green Backlash, trying to understand what are the conflicts between the main political actors there, and then also try to see how this conflict sort of Europeanizes, we can say, so goes from the supranational to the national level into domestic conflicts and domestic policymaking. And I think the ultimate idea is to say something about, as you said, the title of the project, which is about democracy and ecological transformations. Because the point is trying to understand how European democracies are reacting to this, what is the role of national and supranational institutions in preventing and then dealing with this conflict, what are the differences between different institutional settings in different countries, and what outcomes do they produce, basically. And on the other hand, try to understand these conflicts and address the temporality conundrum in democracy and ecological transformations, because we know that the institutions as they are right now, democratic institutions, at least in Europe, are very tied to short-termism. So it's really hard to envisage such a long-term preventive plan as the one that we would need for socio-ecological transformation. And at the same time, it's hard to address the risks that we already have right now. So what is the politics of this backlash? The hypothesis is that it's a sort of an intertemporal, distributive conflict. So between the risks of tomorrow, the ones that are entailed by the ecological crisis, and the risks of today, those that we're already seeing with extreme weather events, but also with the socioeconomic consequences of the decarbonization. So the ultimate goal would be to say something about the role of European democracies in facing ecological transformations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to, round that off, or to, comment on that as well. It's been quite fascinating, for lack of a better term, to see the, it's not just in Europe, but this push to the very far right throughout most elections that have occurred this year and the past year as well. Just thinking about, here in Austria in particular, also the Netherlands, just to give a few examples. I guess it's interesting to see because, we were discussing this last week with Valencia, right? Yeah. And how, in fact, now instead of, so Dr. Atkin is specifically going to, I don't know if I can reveal this, but he's looking into, or his future research, he wants to look at these disaster politics and the reactions behind these disasters and whatnot, and the backlashes and the kind of slingshotting back and forth. And so what we were discussing last week is how the far right, which is currently out of power in Spain, is now trying to monopolize or capitalize upon this disaster. And instead of saying it's climate change is here and we have to deal with it, et cetera, they're instead just pointing fingers and saying, we should be in charge because we would be the ones mitigating this, etc. And I don't know if there's anything you guys have looked at in particular, maybe another example of that.
It's really interesting what you said about the far right. And again, I'm an expert only on the European context, so it's hard to speak about the far right in general. But at least in the European context, right now, it is kind of surprising and sad to say, but they are dominating the climate policy political debate. But the solution that the far right is offering to the electorate is a very conservative solution. So trying to sell the idea of a world that sort of doesn't exist anymore, right? A world where extreme weather events don't exist, where climate change doesn't exist. We're beyond climate denialism, but still, it's not a priority. There's other things that matter, and at the same time, not taking care of really financially, but also culturally helping a transition for certain specific subset of the population. So all in all, it seems like a very weak offer, but still it's an offer that for many sectors of the electorate is more convenient than whatever else is offered to them. So in a sense, there is a call for a progressive socio-ecological alternative, but right now one that garners political support and enough political support to win an election and enact this is lacking. So we really seriously need to start thinking about what are the alternatives to the far right offer, and my take on this is that until a credible alternative that attracts the interests of the lower middle class, especially, but of other classes too, emerges, then this will continue to sort of win, which is very disappointing, of course, for the climate, but also for social inequalities.
Of course, yeah, and of course, like how these previously existing issues, in particular with like social welfare and whatnot, how they're just going to be exacerbated and made worse by rising, I guess, inequality that's driven by climate change. I can't really speak to many other political dynamics around the continent, but at least here in Austria, it was quite frustrating to see. We had massive floods in the middle of September. I think it was the whole region, this part of Europe. I mean, we all experienced it really, but even here in Vienna, I mean. Just pictures of the floods were ridiculous, like going over the walls and everything. And, Vienna, I think, was unique in that regard because we do vote quite left in the city. Yeah. But, even I think it was a week after that, Kiko, the leader of the FPU, they won not the majority per se, but they won the most amount of seats in like the first time ever. And it was, it was quite historic. And so it's like honestly witnessing that disconnect. And it's also just frustrating as well because they, at least here in Austria, like this party does not have policies. They're literally like their only policies are just blaming immigrants for virtually everything. And so, it's also very frustrating to see like these such non-solutions being posited because it's just so obfuscating, I guess, in the information sphere as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree with you. And I think that this social risks perspective and this social policy perspective could be, at least in my view, of course, which is, as you could have guessed by now, kind of biased towards this. But to me, this could be a potential solution, right? Because it's there we talk about who has to pay for the transition, and also who instead should benefit in terms of not in terms of profit making, but in terms of which costs should be compensated and which risks should be protected. And I think we seriously need to start putting attention into this dimension of climate policy making, which is not just about phasing out fossil fuels, investing in renewables, but it's also about who pays the cost of that, and how is that distributed. So a credible policy alternative and political alternative to me has to incorporate that necessarily. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's see. Let's hope for the best. Okay. And
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. I'm going to end with like one slightly more lighthearted question to like, I guess hopefully like raise the mood a little bit from there. But so since you've been able to visit us here in Vienna, as an Austrian, I am obligated to ask you if you have been trying any of our pastries. So anything like any of the Kuchen, or like, I don't know if you tried any Zemmel, or like anything stood out to you. And also I have to ask, how does it compare to Paris? Because I don't know if you know this, but croissants are originally Austrian.
Are they?
We will die on this hill. Yes.
Okay. I didn't know that.
This is one of the most egregious historical injustices in my. No, I'm kidding.
Oh wow! So it was a cultural appropriation by the French.
I mean, among other things, yeah.
Okay, among other things.
But I'm just curious, like if anything stood out to you, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I really like Vienna. I mean, it's hard to dislike Vienna. It's so pretty that nobody could say Vienna isn't nice. Apple strudel is from Vienna, right? Can we confirm that it's not from anywhere else? I'm looking also at the kind of director. But if it is, then I would say I have tried it, and actually it's it's something that my parents were always obsessed with. So it's something that feels a little bit like home for me, because it's something that I've been having for a long time. So I love it, and it brings me back a little bit. I don't know if I can compare it to the French pastry, which I also really love, but I work at Sciences Po, but I'm Italian. So if we talk about food, there's another country that I should pay justice to. So it's really, really complicated. I'm loving Vienna. So I hope you guys will host me again. That was really nice to come here. And also a serious answer to this unserious question would be that I've read a lot about how Vienna stands out in many socio-ecological senses. Take one example, housing. How housing is much better in terms of affordability and structure than in other European cities. And coming here, you kind of give a face to what you've read a lot about, right? And you can feel that, like in many senses, it seems like a very livable city in a socio-ecological sense. So I'm not an expert on that at all, but it was nice to see that with my own eyes. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the ironic thing about it here is that and I can say this because I am half Viennese. Even though it is such an incredibly livable city, right? Food prices are kept quite in check. We have amazing public transportation. You can actually see it in the streets, like between just how many kids live here, right? And how many people choose to raise a family here, which is amazing. Like I hopefully will with my kids one day. And also, of course, like the social housing. So anyone who doesn't know who's listening, basically like the way that Vienna works is it goes all the way back to, I believe, it's the 1920s at some point. It was originally a socialized program that created incredibly good social housing throughout the city, and now I think it still makes up anywhere from, I have to double check the figures, but like 30-40%.
But a huge bunch.
Yeah, there's different versions of it. Like the one that mostly comes to mind is the called Gemeindebaus, and so it's like you basically pay the government a lease, and therefore, and it just it artificially keeps the housing market incredibly like artificially cheap, and it just works so well, especially in these like social policies, and it just frees up your ability to invest in other areas and like make things more livable. But the ironic thing is that we, the Viennese, are some of the grumpiest peoples on the planet. Like we are genuinely some of the meanest and rudest people, and I kind of take pride in that, to be honest. Sometimes I shouldn't say that, but and it's just super ironic because you walk around and everyone's like grumpy. And it has this like curmudgeon face on, right? And it's like
really?
I think honestly, and you think to yourself like, okay, there's so many worse places to live. There's so many more issues that you could have that you don't have here. So it's always interesting to hear. And also, I apologize because I've sent you back into into a bad situation with your French colleagues and like trying to like send you a loaded question, so I apologize for that. But I think that's pretty much everything that we want to ask you. And if there's anything else, I guess you'd like to add or include.
No, I just want to thank you. I mean, it's a nice. I've never kind of done such a podcast / video scenario, so it was fun to do it. And thanks a lot, guys, for welcoming me these days. It was really, really cool to be here, and for preparing this. It was such a nice conversation, so thank you so much. I enjoyed it a lot. I'm just glad that you enjoyed it, and I didn't ask anything too silly. And you can thank Dr. Etkin, because it was actually his idea to start this, so hopefully we'll do some more in the future. But thank you so much. It was great having you. Thank you. Thanks. All right, and